My name's Matt Jenkin. I'm an employment partner at Moorcrofts, for those who don't know me. And we thought it was really important to put this session on. So what are we going to be looking at today? As I say, it's action-packed. Why is menopause in the workplace one of the issues for HR and organisations in 2023? What's the current state of employment law? Are we going to see employment law reform in this area? What is menopause and perimenopause? What are the common signs and symptoms? And that's both physical and psychological. And how do they impact on colleagues and their work, which is really important to understand. What's the latest position on employment law in the menopause? What's the business and financial reasons and the legal imperatives for introducing menopause policies? How can you support colleagues? And how can you build awareness of menopause health? As I say, we've got lots to get through, and I'm really delighted to be joined today to discuss this. I'm joined by Dr. Laila Kaikavoosi. Laila is the founder and clinical director at the Online Menopause Centre. Laila's an expert in this area, and her contribution to the webinar is very much appreciated, and I think will prove to be invaluable. So welcome, Laila.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone.
Excellent to have you with us. And I'm going to just kind of quickly set the scene, if I may. So why now? But I know from talking to a lot of my HR contacts who've kindly registered to attend this webinar, they made it pretty clear to me that whilst they really like hearing from me on these webinars, what they're really interested to do is to hear from Laila and get her insights into this area. So I'm not going to take too much time up in setting the scene. But why now? Why is menopause in the workplace becoming such a huge issue for employers? I know it's on a lot of agendas and towards the list, the to-do list, I think, for a lot of organisations at the moment. So why now? Well, I'm not going to go through all the statistics here, but just pick out that 1 in 10 women who work during the menopause have left the job due to their symptoms. We all know, don't we, as employers, the cost of losing staff and the problems in recruiting staff at the moment. It's still a relatively tight market to recruit into. And if you're losing employees at that level, you've got issues in that you're losing their experience, their knowledge, you're losing very experienced staff. And you've also got problems in recruiting those replacements. So, you know, the numbers start to tell a picture on that as to why now. And that was really followed up. There was a report the government produced in 2017, the effects on economic participation. If anyone suffers from insomnia, it's a great read. But I think there are some bits that you can pick out from that I think do assist us in this discussion. And it's a 2017 report. I suspect if they ran the same survey today, the numbers would be even higher. But the one thing that I would take from that is women are now working till later in life than in the past. In the UK at that stage, there were around 4.3 million women aged 50 and over in employment. So you've got a growing category of employees who may be impacted by the menopause and menopause symptoms. And I know Laila will talk to us about that. But it is that effect on economic participation that I think is driving a lot of the interest in menopause in the workplace now. And also, as an employment lawyer, obviously, I have to mention the rise of menopause-related employment tribunal claims. The latest statistics I saw was a 44% increase in claims citing menopause. And I'll talk a little bit later on about some of those claims. They're largely discrimination and unfair dismissal claims. And mentions of the word menopause increased by 75% in tribunal documentation. So we know this is something that we're starting to see come through the tribunal system, and employers need to be aware of it to ensure that you're not in that category of employers who are facing those claims. And is the government stepping in to increase protection? There's been a lot of chatter, hasn't there, from the government? Some of you who follow lots of the HR forums and reports will have seen various reports and responses to reports. And the government's published its response to the report from the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee on menopause in the workplace. Really valuable report, actually, I found. And I'm sure, like me, many of you were probably disappointed in the government's response to that report. because by and large, they've rejected the proposals. And the key proposals that were rejected, I've set out there. So we're not going to see the production of model menopause policies. We're not going to see this development and the piloting of a menopause leave policy. We won't see the introduction of dual characteristic claims, so bringing a claim before the tribunal for age and disability discrimination as a combined claim. You'll still be able to bring them separately, as we'll see in a little bit later time. That is where a lot of the claims are coming from. And also, perhaps the one that got the most publicity is the government isn't going to make menopause a specific protected characteristic alongside sex and race and sexual orientation, etc. That's something that was being discussed, but has been, I think, firmly ruled out at the moment. And what does that mean? I think it leaves employers needing to take the initiative. You're not going to have the government setting a framework for how you deal with menopause in the workplace. So it's important, I think, that you understand what menopause is, what the symptoms are, understand what the reasons why you need to address it, and understand how you can support your staff. And I'm going to hand over to Laila to talk us through those issues. So what is menopause, Laila? Handing over to you, because I'm certainly by no means an expert in this area.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for making time in your busy schedules to be with us this morning and to listen to this webinar on menopause in the workplace. I'm here to talk about what I know best, which is the menopause. So let's get going with that. What is menopause? Menopause is essentially a natural physiological process that every woman goes through, usually between the ages of 45 to 58, but the average age in the UK is 51. Menopause, the actual word, just means cessation of the menstrual cycle. It is diagnosed when the cycles have stopped for 12 months. And we talk about the average age being 51, but it's also important to note that women can reach menopause at a much earlier age, under 40 or even under 30. There's a variety of reasons for this. Some are family history oriented, genetics, and some are due to the other medical conditions. For example, if a woman is having cancer treatment, that may push her into early menopause. Perimenopause is the time around the menopause when a woman can have regular or irregular menstrual cycles, but she's starting to experience the fluctuations of hormones and with it experience symptoms of the menopause. It's really important also to mention here that menopause can be, I refer to woman and her and she, but it's also important to note that menopause can be experienced by those who no longer identify as women. Anyone who's experienced female puberty can experience these symptoms, and we need to be sensitive on this. So this is a data presentation from the British Menopause Society. It's basically there to point out that how menopause is actually everyone's business. That's why we're here this morning to talk about it. Matt, if you just, that's great. So the data looked at the various parts of a woman's life as she goes through perimenopause and menopause, and found that if we look at the green box, 45% actually experience symptoms that can negatively impact their workplace. They looked at personal relationships, social lives, and also how the partners, their life partners, was dealing with their partner's menopause. The interesting thing is that almost 50% of those that experienced menopause that negatively impacted their work actually chose not to disclose it to their employer. There were a variety of reasons for this, but it revolved around stigmatization at work and fear of demotion. Next slide, please, Matt. Yeah, so here I'm going to be talking about the common and sometimes not so common symptoms of menopause. It's really important to note that we have hormone receptors absolutely everywhere in our body. So with the decline of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, the main female hormones, we experience many different physical and psychological symptoms. So on this slide, I've concentrated on the physical symptoms. The top two, hot flushes and night sweats, are the famous two that are often talked about, and more people know about these two. So if you experience a sort of rising hot flush and you feel red and sweaty, people often recognize that that could be related to the menopause. But insomnia, or waking early in the morning, inability to fall asleep, that really impacts someone's work quite greatly. Some other symptoms are joint and muscle pain, headaches, which could be new onset or worsening of a woman's long-standing migraine headaches that goes out of control during the perimenopause with the fall in hormones, gritty eyes due to dryness that comes with estrogen deficiency, tinnitus or ringing in the ears, thinning hair, itchy skin, and also a very disturbing sort of sensation of insect crawling under the skin that some people experience, or even some people experience some very sharp needle-like pain on the surface of the skin, especially when there is a windy day. Weight gain and some other symptoms like urinary frequency, urgency, recurrent urinary tract infection, or cystitis. So, depending on what the job is, that can affect someone's, depending on what symptoms they have and what job they need to do. For example, someone who's a musician having tinnitus or ringing in the ear can be really impacting their work. And, for someone who's using their job, if they're a jewelry maker or needing sort of fine eye visual acuity, that can impact them as well. Now we can talk about the psychological symptoms that can be even more disturbing, and they're extremely common. Anxiety, low mood or tearfulness, irritability or losing temper very quickly, brain fog, which has been actually on multiple different surveys done by a variety of clinics and centers, has been named as one of the worst symptoms for women to deal with when it comes to workplace. Inability to focus and concentrate, poor memory, and a general reduction in their motivation and interest that can result in then low self-esteem or confidence, and a reduced zest for life. So these are definitely not exhaustive. There are many more symptoms than what I have managed to put on these two slides, but they're the general and main symptoms. And they can be, experienced in isolation. So some people just experience quite significant brain fog or joint pain. But in more women, actually, they have a combination of the symptoms. And everyone is so different in the way they present, due to the fact that, depends on what set of, what hormone deficiency they have, and what they, and how that affects their work depends on their job as well, of course. Next slide, please, Matt. We do annual menopause research at Online Menopause Centre. And this time last year, we looked at menopause and work. We surveyed 464 women, and of those, 48% said that menopause and perimenopause had affected their job, and 11% said that it had severely impacted their work, but only 14% discussed it with their employer. We wanted to find out why that was, why such a small percentage decided to disclose or discuss with their employer. And on the right-hand side, you see a variety of reasons, but the top of the list was that the woman felt that the employer couldn't really help them, followed by that they didn't think they could understand, they felt embarrassed, they felt, again, feared demotion and losing their job. So of those women who actually discuss their symptoms with their employer, unfortunately, almost 50% of employers actually offered no help. Some smaller percentage offered some interventions or help. for example, like ensuring that there was organizational training, so just increasing overall workplace awareness and knowledge about it, so that the woman could feel sort of included, and also offering some specific intervention like working from home, or offering access to menopause specialists for treatment. Next slide, please. So you may think, why are we talking about this today, and why should employers even bother with menopause in the workplace? You may remember about 10-15 years ago, we were in a similar situation with mental health, and with increasing awareness campaigns and public education. Things started to change in a positive way, and I feel we're at the brink of a similar change with menopause. There are a variety of reasons why employers should bother with menopause in the workplace, but here we're going to discuss 4 compelling cases for it. And in the next few slides, we'll go into details of the business, social responsibility, demographic reason, and also the legal case for menopause in the workplace. We'll get started with the business case, and of course, women affected by menopause are generally at a more senior level in their work, and we know that knowledge costs. Losing someone who's got a lot of experience, has significant knowledge, and has been a significant member of a team, has a good rapport with her team members, costs money, and recruiting another person with similar or even less experience that is a good fit into that team can be difficult, can be time consuming, and definitely it can cost money. Office of National Statistics did a survey about 4 years ago, and they found that 14 million working days in 1 year were lost due to menopausal symptoms. And I feel that this is actually an underrepresentation, because as we saw earlier on, not all women, and not actually very few women disclose why they're taking the true reason for taking time off work. Heather Hancock is one of my patients. She very kindly and bravely agreed to talk about her journey through menopause. She was working as a board member in a healthcare company when she started to experience some perimenopausal symptoms. The most severe one was that of brain fog, and it was to the point that she really felt that she was developing early onset dementia. We did some tests on her. She was quite severely deficient in key female hormones, and with replacement she felt a lot better, and I'm happy to report she's back in employment. But in her own words, she said that I've always relied on my brain to think things through. I could no longer trust my brain, and that made me incredibly anxious and fearful. The next case is that of the demographic. Women we know are, as Matt mentioned earlier on as well, they're the fastest growing working demographic, women between the ages of 50 and 64, which is the average postmenopausal age. About 3.5–4 million women are in the menopausal range in employment, so that's 45 to 54. Kuru Kids is a childcare provider company, and they did a poll of 2,000 women, found that 18% were looking to leave their job because of their menopausal symptoms. So it's quite significant, and more or less, whether a variety of employers or British Menopause Society or menopause specialist clinics, when they do surveys, the same sort of statistics is reproduced, which is in a way good, because it's more sort of factual, but bad in a way that it's a huge percentage of women that feel unsupported and not comfortable disclosing why they need to have time off. And of course, I feel perhaps the most important is our social responsibility. It's just the right thing to do to support women to stay as long as they want to in their employment. And if we compare it to very similar sort of female-related topics like pregnancy, maternity, these are quite positive, ordinary workplace conversations, and we should really try to aim to make the same for menopause. It should no longer be a taboo subject to work. The minute you feel listened to and able to disclose and talk about what you're going through, half of the problem is solved, and you feel more supported, and you can do your best and have a better quality of work as well. I think the next slide is the legal case, which I'll leave to the expert, Matt.
Thanks, Laila. Yeah, the legal case. You know, and I think there is a legal imperative for acting. I'm an employment lawyer, so I'm bound to say that, aren't I? But just to give some background, the menopause is not itself a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the government's confirmed that it has no plans to make it one. However, when you look at these cases that are coming through, it's clear that an employer's treatment of women can lead to age discrimination claims, sex discrimination claims, disability discrimination claims, unfair dismissal claims, and constructive unfair dismissal claims. You know, there are the employees can use the current employment law regime in order to pursue claims where they think they've not been treated appropriately due to menopause related reasons. And we're certainly starting to see more and more cases come through. And I just wanted to highlight this particular case as an example, I think, of where employers can fall short of what's required and really demonstrate a lack of understanding and knowledge of employees who are going through the menopause. It's the case of female employee versus Bon Marché Limited. Just a slight word of caution on this case. You'll see it's Bon Marché Limited in administration. So by the time it got to the employment tribunal hearing, Bon Marché were actually in administration, and the administrator decided not to contest the claim. So the judge reached his decision hearing from the claimant, the former employee only. So, you know, would it have made any difference had they heard from the company and heard from the manager particularly? Well, I was reading the employment tribunal decision judgment yesterday just to remind myself of how badly this particular employer got it wrong. And I don't think it would have changed anything at all had they heard from the manager in particular. It's very difficult to see how that could have been defended. But just a word of caution on that case. In this particular case, this female employee had worked in retail for 37 years and was a high achiever. And when I was reading the judgment, what came through, she loved working in retail. She really enjoyed it. That's the workplace that she wanted to be in. All that changed in May 2017 for her when she began to go through the menopause. And her manager started to treat her very differently and without the support that we would expect. He demeaned her in front of other members of staff, including calling her a dinosaur. He criticised her unreasonably and related this being she was menopausal. Now, one of the incidents complained of, she was having problems stapling a couple of documents together, and he made some very inappropriate and rude and unacceptable comments to her around that. He also refused to adjust the temperature in the shop, and we've looked at, haven't we, about some of those symptoms. You know, perhaps that would have been, you know, something that they could have looked to adjust just to help this particular employee cope with their symptoms a little bit more. And as with all employees, they're encouraged, aren't they, when they've got issues, they took them to higher management. But no action was taken, again, demonstrating a lack of understanding of what this particular employee was going through, both in the symptoms that she was suffering, but also in the treatment that she was receiving at the hands of her manager. Again, and not surprisingly, but you know, tragically suffered a breakdown, but did manage to get into a situation where she came back to work. And even then, the employer still didn't really put in place any support mechanisms or really deal with the manager. At that stage, the manager was extremely cold towards her and was threatening. Now, at that stage, this is an employee who loved her career, but had felt enough was enough. She resigned and she brought claims for sex and age harassment. And the employment tribunal considered the claim, and they held that the comments made by the manager regarding the employee's menopause were very clearly related to her sex and age. And I think the employment judge puts it very succinctly in one paragraph of the judgment, where the judge says, I had absolutely no doubt that in this case, the respondent, in the person of the manager, was guilty of harassing the claimant. It was quite clear from the claimant's evidence that she felt he had created a hostile environment for her, and that this was related to her status of a woman going through the menopause. I consider this to amount to unlawful harassment on grounds of sex and age. And that resulted in a fairly significant compensation award, including, as I put on the screen, an injury to feelings award of £18,000. Now, £18,000 back then, when the case came through, probably would have put it in the higher band of injury to feelings awards. So what it shows, I think, and fairly extreme example, but it does show, I think, employers who lack understanding of employees who are experiencing menopause symptoms, and aren't putting in place proper support mechanisms, and also aren't doing a proper job educating other staff about what it may mean for employees who are going through the menopause. And I think all those things combined, I think it's no surprise that they lost the claim. And we are seeing more of these claims come through. And I suspect 2023 and 2024 will continue to see a steady rise in menopause-related employment tribunal claims. So we've looked at, haven't we, the compelling reasons, the business case, the demographic case, the social responsibility case. And I would echo, Laila, that sometimes you do these things because they're the right thing to do, not just because an employment lawyer is about to tell you that if you don't get this right, it's going to cost you a lot. It's just good that we do these things. And of course, the legal case. So if you're an organisation who hopefully now understands that you should be taking this seriously, and I appreciate that for lots of you join the webinar, that you do take this seriously, and it's one of the reasons why you've joined the webinar. But what should you look to be doing as an employer? What's the support that you can put in place? So, Laila, I know you've got some thoughts on this about what employers should be doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two main sort of subcategories of what the employers should be doing. One is, of course, raising awareness amongst all employees. So just making the workplace very sort of inclusive, understanding, because that would be a much better place for that person to work in, and it just sort of makes everyone happier to work in that environment. And also specifically for the person who's going through menopause, to have some specific supports there. Of course, that has to be geared up to the workplace as well. So the workplace, they have to see what they can offer, and what so if they can, for example, if the woman is having particular problems with her hot flushes, night sweats, she hasn't been able to sleep, can she work from home for a couple of days just to get her symptoms under control? Or if there is, for example, the case that you just mentioned, if they can reduce the temperature of her workplace or have cool water near her, so some specific or just some practical solutions to help her in her day-to-day work. But raising awareness amongst employees can be done in multiple different ways. Either it's by having lunch and learn webinars to raise awareness amongst colleagues, amongst managers. The other thing is, we have, for example, we can help create the menopause policy, and that policy can be, as you said, it's not sort of a law requirement for workplaces to have a menopause policy, but it's just it's a great document to have. Not for it to sit there and collect dust, but for people to, new employees who come in, to have a reference point, and for people who are guiding their colleagues also to know what is available in that workplace, what can be done, what is menopause, in fact, what are the symptoms that can be related to that, and how can they, and to what extent can they offer help. Of course, having menopause mentors is a great thing. And a lot of in the last 18 months, a lot of corporates and workplaces are actually moving towards this, because that makes the menopause policy come to life. You know, having the mentors who are updated, who know exactly where to get some advice, how to signpost their colleagues to get the relevant information or the relevant advice. It would be great to have that. And also having easy access menopause care and treatment for the employees who have a significant role to play in that workplace, because the quicker they can sort out their symptoms, the quicker they can get the best sort of out of them, and they can have better productivity and to have this menopause policy in the workplace. I think also it's very attractive for recruiting new staff, for retaining the talents that they have. I know from amongst my patients, those who are going between jobs, always actually in this age group, they are looking for that. They're looking to see, and often I hear, this, I'm going for whatever workplace, because they seem to have great mentorship and they can be there. A lot of workplaces already have mental health mentors, mental health champions. So it could be that person can, if they want to, get training in menopause mentorship as well, so they can extend it, because as we saw, there's a lot of psychological symptoms that comes with menopause and perimenopause, and if they can be supported, that would be great.
And Laila, I know that at the centre which you run, are you starting to see? I've just put it up on the slide there. I know, talking to you, are you starting to see employers becoming more interested in this as a topic? So I know you do lots of work with individuals, but are you starting to see employers becoming more interested in what kind of support mechanisms they should put in place? Because I know you're kind of heavily involved in kind of helping them kind of shape their menopause policy. But is it a kind of a growing area of work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we went into this menopause in the workplace as we set up Online Menopause Centre 2 years ago, and it was there to provide accessible and convenient sort of menopause consultations online for women who were busy, difficult to come to, because a lot of menopause specific clinics or menopause specialists tend to be concentrated in bigger cities, especially in the capital. In London, there's a lot, but when you go to more elsewhere in the country, it's more difficult to have that service provided. So that was the main basis of setting up OMC up. But in the last year, due to demand and people inquiring about this, workplaces and corporates, we've actually been able to create this extension to our services and to provide specific webinars and mentorship trainings, which has been extremely popular. I mean, only yesterday I was doing the mentorship training with a college. And also e-learning module is another thing that was, we created that again from based on the demand of workplaces that wanted this, because quite often, you set up the live lunch and learn webinars, but of course people are at work and they may not find the time to attend. So e-learning module is great because they can go through the basics of menopause, perimenopause, and how to support their colleagues, but in the comfort of their own home or in their own time. And it can be sort of a CPD as well that they can tick. But yeah, there's definitely a growing with the I think in the last couple of years there's been a rising interest and just general public awareness about menopause, with celebrities talking about it, which is great. With it was a number of programs that has been made about menopause, and people are feeling more comfortable actually speaking up about their own individual journeys and also extending it to their workplace, because it's not something that only one or a group of people go through. Every woman that reaches a certain age, or even before that, depending on what condition they have, they go through this, and it really affects different aspects of life. It's not just you feel a little bit hot and sweaty, and you just need to ventilate your space or whatever. We have hormone receptors on every organ in our body, and so from our cognition, our memory, focus, to our how well our joints are working, to heat control, our sleep, our relationship with our colleagues, personal relationship, everything gets affected. So something, and it's not, of course, it's not a pathological disorder, it's not a disease, it's a physiological transition in life, and it goes on for a number of years. It's not something that happens for a month or two and then you're done with it. Often another thing is that I hear women talk about, do you think I'm through with menopause? There's nothing to get through. Menopause is just a point in time when a woman has stopped menstruating for 12 months. After that point, she's always postmenopausal. Whether or not she has significant symptoms is individual. So, for a lot of women, for the first few years after that, they have quite a significant number of symptoms, and then it eases off. But it really depends. I have women who are in their 80s who choose to remain on hormone replacement because they're very active. They're authors, or they've remained active. And I have professional gardeners who can't, they can't work with their joints if they stop taking HRT. So it's something, and women, generally, all of us are living longer now, and everybody chooses to work for longer. So there's those who've remained in employment, those women who actually have brought up their families and maybe were stepping back, but now they want to come back into the workforce. So, there's a huge percentage of women in that phase in life that then need to be supported to remain productive. And I think you have a better sort of psychological, there's reduction in anxiety, and if a woman stays to enjoy the job that she's doing, and she remains, her brain remains active as well, it's great. So that she should be able to do that and remain productive and happy.
Yeah, I would echo sort of the interest from employers in kind of looking at menopause in the workplace. We've certainly I've seen more questions over the last kind of 3-4 months about menopause issues. How do we support staff? What sort of initiatives can we look to put in place? Luckily, none of my clients have had to deal with any employment tribunal claims. That's because I'd like to think my clients are really, are really looking at this as being proactive. They take social responsibility very seriously and are looking to avoid claims. So we're certainly seeing more issues around that, and just general more employment law updates and news around menopause. The sort of response to the government's decision not to introduce the recommendations from the committee report got a huge amount of publicity in sort of the legal and HR press that I don't think we would have seen 12 months ago. So it's definitely making its way up the agenda, if not probably at the top of the agenda for a lot of organisations. And what I just wanted to do was just come on and just talk about some questions, because we've had some really good questions come in and we've got time to deal with those. So there's a common theme to a couple of them. One person has asked, Laila, is there any connection to early menopause and IVF treatments?
There hasn't been many sorts of research on this, but of course we know any for women who IVF treatment has psychological and physical burden for the woman, and that can actually, of course, our menstrual cycle and hormones are hugely affected by how we feel emotionally as well. And for a woman who's going through IVF treatment, as well as physically being quite exhaustive, it can be psychologically exhaustive as well. So that can definitely impact the age at which she starts her menopause. Yes.
Oh, thank you. We had a question about do you offer training for menopause mentors, which I know you've talked about and said that you do. What typically sort of kind of would a training process look like for a mentor?
Yeah, mentorship training actually has proven to be quite popular. Even this year, I've been quite busy, delivering these mentorship trainings. So usually it starts with a half-a-day training, and it's quite. We do give breaks, but it's an online 4.5 hours training, followed by 3 1-hour catch-up times. So after the mentors get their initial training with very specific, so they learn basics of menopause, but digging a little bit deeper than what we just touched on today. Then they will have practical sort of solutions for their colleagues and some useful advice and material that they can give them. And following that, after a month, they have an hour-long webinar again where we get together and talk about. They can send their questions, or if they've seen cases, or they've talked to colleagues about their menopause and they need help, or if there's any specific areas that they want to look at. So they have half-a-day training followed by 3 1-hour follow-up sessions, so we can catch up and go over things again.
That's really interesting. I think it's embedding that sort of training with them then, isn't it, in terms of the follow-up session. So
yeah. I mean, one of the other things that is really I think is great is the survey and an audit to find out exactly what's going on in that workplace, because as I said, every workplace is very individual. Again, it's very specific for that. So knowing what's the demographics, how many people are going through this phase, what is the need for that workplace to become more understanding and more supportive in the middle, and what's the best learning sort of category for them specific, because some workplaces, due to time differences, or they may be across the time zones from one another, they work better with the e-learning modules, whereas for the others it's the live webinars, lunch and learn, or the mentorship is great because you're training people within that organization to look after other people in that organization. It's always the best way to do it.
Oh, I agree. That kind of experiential learning is always I think some of the most powerful. So yeah, definitely mentor training. It sounds to me like it's a worthwhile for employers who are looking at taking this seriously to look at. We've had a couple of questions around menopause policies, which I know is something that probably we both get asked about by employers. And people have asked, what are the elements of a good menopause policy, and what's a kind of structure for a policy? So what should people think about if they're looking at drafting a policy? Obviously, from ringing you or me up and saying, "Can you help me draft a policy?" What should they think about as going into them?
Again, the policy, sometimes I just think even it can be integrated into whatever well-being policy that they have, or it can be a separate document, whether they call it, whatever document or policy. It's really, again, up to that organization or employer. But there is, we have put together a structure for this, that because there's a number of things that goes into it. For example, understanding what this is, because you can imagine for perhaps a younger person, or for a male who's never experienced it, even in their, you know, within their social group, they might not even understand what this transitional time is, what is menopause. So a basic explanation of what it is and what set of symptoms can be experienced, and how that individual can be affected in the workplace, followed by how they can be supported. I mean, you know, the final and the most important part is supporting that person and making that environment a better place for that person and everyone involved. So that really depends on the individual. So we have got a general policy that we can, you know, of course, help send, but there's a specific to that, the specifics for that workplace should be done after we've done the survey to find out exactly what is going on. So it's not one size fits all, because I see quite a lot of, like, for example, policies on even internet, but it doesn't cover every individual either issue in that workplace or what they can offer, because of course you have to be reasonable for the employer to be able to. Some workplaces they literally cannot offer many for sort of work days from home, whereas for others it's more doable to do that.
I would echo that in any sort of employment policies. I think there's always a danger, I think, of having a template policy, in that they're a good starting point, but I think it's how you then mold that to suit an individual business's requirements that's key. And really interesting, you kind of touch on sort of workplace surveys to kind of, you know, find out what's going on in the organization, find out, you know, where you are on that sort of journey and what sort of support needs to be taken in place. So hopefully that's helped some people with some tips if they're looking at policies, which is very good. We've had another question come in about, can we recommend a really good menopause awareness video or presentation? The person in question said they found it quite tricky to find something suitable for everyone as a starting point, which I guess is one of the issues, isn't it? Is explaining this so that everyone in the workplace can understand it.
Yeah, I mean, we deliver you know, webinars to colleagues and to managers to understand about, you know, what menopause is and just raising awareness. We also have menopause cafes once a month, which is open to all our patients, their friends and family. They've been recorded and they're on our hub. So on the website, there is on the right hand side there's a tab called the hub, and all the previous cafes, which are, and amongst them one of the earlier ones was actually about menopause awareness. What is menopause, what is perimenopause, what are the common symptoms and how to deal with them. So that's a good starting point, I guess.
Yeah, I think that hub resource on your website, I was having a look at it in preparation for this. I've looked at it a few times. There's some really interesting learning points on there, and I encourage everyone to take a look at that. We've had a couple of questions come in around, is HRT the only treatment to ease off symptoms?
No, HRT is not. HRT stands for hormone replacement therapy. And, you know, depending on what set of symptoms the woman is experiencing and how severe the symptoms are, that sort of, and of course, it is a treatment, and like any other treatment, it can have side effects. So you always have to assess the benefits to the risk of taking something. And there are some women that can categorically not take hormone replacement. For example, those who are going through breast cancer treatment, or they have hormone sensitive cancers, or either in the past or currently they're going through treatment. There are non-hormonal treatments. There are some, you know, herbal, and there may be, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very specific for hot flushes and night sweats. So there's a number of different ways that you can. We have a in-house naturopath, for example, who is she's actually very skilled in women's health, and also has a PhD in cancer biology. So, for women who are medically, they are at risk of taking hormones, there are other ways to treat their symptoms.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you look at kind of the kind of wider ranging kind of solutions and options, which I know HRT is one, but there's obviously clearly others that you need to look at. We've had, let me just check the questions. Someone said, how long does the menopause usually last? And as I took it from it, you were saying, well, that very much can depend on the individual.
Yeah. I mean, menopause is just a moment in time. It's exactly 12 months after the last menstrual cycle. So you can actually diagnose that at home yourselves. You don't need any medical sort of investigations to diagnose a menopause. The time, any time after that is post-menopause. So some women, I think what this person is trying to get at is that how long do the symptoms last? And for the majority, the symptoms last anything between 3 to 5 years after after menopause, which is 12 months after the last cycle. But for some women, that it can last a lifetime. So, even in their 80s, 90s, they can still have hot flushes, night sweats, they can have insomnia if they don't take the hormone replacement. I think the more confusing part is actually perimenopause, because that's the time when the woman still experiences either regular or irregular cycles. So she may not think that this is related to fluctuations of hormone level, but she starts to experience symptoms because the levels of hormone go up and down quite drastically. So she can go through a stretch of time, 3, 4, 5 months, where she's experiencing symptoms, and then spontaneously it resolves and gets better. So she then forgets about it. And this is actually a very important time to try to replace the hormones that are missing in order to also prevent chronic disease like heart disease, like early onset dementia.
Okay. Oh, right. Yeah, I think hopefully that's helpful in terms of, in terms of how long it may last for. Someone's asked a question around the likelihood of prolapse during perimenopause and menopause. I didn't know whether there's anything specific you could say on that quickly, Laila.
Of course, and so there's many hormone receptors in the pelvic area, and one of the symptoms that women often experience again is the vulvovaginal dystrophy, which is shrinkage of the and thinning of the skin, shrinkage of the organs, and with that prolapse, whether it's uterine prolapse or bladder, it can get worse, and they can have symptoms from that, whether it's pain or urinary symptoms like urgency or frequency. Okay,
hopefully that's useful for the person who asked that question. We've had someone come in with a question about how young should children or teenagers kind of be made to learn about menopause, to raise awareness and fight stigma.
I'm so glad that this person asked this question, because I love that. I think it's something that we should aim to do as early as when they start learning about sex education. So it's a perfect time when they're learning, when kids are learning about sex education, about contraception, about menstrual cycle, just to extend that talk and make them aware of this, because of course we know it can happen much earlier in a person, and it's actually in the very young person. So if you get premature menopause or perimenopause, is when she's at very high risk of developing osteoporosis and early onset, heart disease, blood pressure problem. So this is the person that should be aware and start replacing hormones as early as possible.
And have you come across any schools that are doing kind of building this into their kind of health program at the moment, or is it still something that schools really need to look at and develop?
Yeah, I don't know any schools that has been built into their program or their, of course, my kids' school know about it because my kids have enlightened the biology lesson with the with the menopause. But no, I don't know any programs are already in place.
Um, yeah, I think the more that we can encourage any sort of discussion and debate around this, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in school, whether it's between ourselves, to kind of
Medical
remove.
school, Matt, even medical school, because I went through, of course, years ago through medical school, through general practice training, knowing very little about menopause.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so I don't think it would be, and it needs to start from the learning institutions, first of all from medical schools, and it needs to be built into the. It's not a very attractive topic to discuss, and in the gynecology, I remember it was a very small half an hour. That's it.
Oh
So
wow.
as a GP working for years before I went into menopause care, I knew a little bit about it, but not much at all.
Oh wow. So yeah, I think anything where any of these sort of issues where perhaps there's a stigma to discussing them, I think the more that we can discuss them openly, the workplace, in schools, between ourselves, between professionals, I think is fantastic. I'm conscious that we're coming up to 12 o'clock. We've had lots of interesting questions. I've not been able to answer all of them, but what we'll do is try and capture all of them and produce a Q&A sheet, which we'll send out as follow-up. I have had some fantastic commenting about how people have really appreciated our sort of um, uh, kind of clinical approach to this, and having Laila on and talking about it from a clinician's perspective. So I hope, like me, you've all learned an awful lot around the subject and about what you and your organisation should be doing to encourage that. As I say, we are recording it. We'll send the link out, we'll send the slides, we'll do our follow-up, and we'll make sure we get you Laila and their team's details over so you can look at their website and engage with them. It just leaves me to say, Laila, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking your time out of a busy clinician's diary, which I know must be really busy, to talk through us and the attendees on what is a really hugely important topic. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you everyone for coming on and staying with us for the session. I hope you found it useful. As I say, any questions or queries, please do follow them up with myself or Laila, and we'll make sure we get back to you, and look out for the follow-up that will come through. So that just leaves me to say thank you and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.